To give you a sense of how competitive MBA admissions can be, Wharton's core stats are pretty similar to the Stanford GSB and HBS, the two schools that Wharton is desperately trying to catch up to in the prestige derby. Wharton's average GPA is a 3.7, HBS and GSB 3.7. Wharton's average classic GMAT 732. The GSB's 738. For what it's worth, HBS offers a median of 740 rather than an average, so we don't have an apples-to-apples comparison, but it's pretty darn close. So what about the GRE? 162 verbal, 163 quant at Wharton, 163 verbal, 164 quant at Stanford. HBS again offers a median of 163, 163. If all that went by you very quickly, the differences are basically 0.1 of a GPA and then 1 to 2 points of the GRE, or kind of 6 points on the GMAT. It's actually not a lot. What this really says is that the stats can't go that much higher, and many programs are maxing out on them. Different conversation, but that reality drove GMAC to change the GMAT scale. For more on that, check out my conversation with Manhattan Prep powered by Kaplan's head of curriculum, Stacey Koprinz. Anyway, let's go deeper into the stats you need to get into Wharton. We'll get back into the core GPA, GMAT, GRE stats in a moment, but there's a stat that got Wharton onto the front pages. The class of 2023 made history when Wharton admitted more women than men, a first for a top MBA program. More recently, those numbers have declined ever so slightly. A recent Wharton class was 47% women, and that's about 50 fewer women than when the school achieved this milestone. But it's still ahead of the HBS's 45% and the GSB's 43% women. Wharton is 31% international, and it's approximately 265 international students come from 65 different countries. Looking further into the program's demographics, 10% of the class, or about 85 students, identify as LGBTQ+. That's pretty remarkable. In my first year in business in 2004, we had only one of about 40 applicants who publicly identified as LGBTQ. Wharton is 6% African American and 8% Latino, a change from 9% African American and 7% Latino. Hard to know if the ruling from the United States Supreme Court invalidating affirmative action in admissions led to that small drop in admits. And Wharton is 11% first-gen college students, which many programs now gauge as a proxy for diversity, and it held constant in this regard. If you feel like the Wharton applicant pool is getting a little more competitive, well, arguably it is. I was surprised to see that Wharton had 62 deferred Moelis students in its most recent class. A decade ago, all 850 spots were up for grabs in the general admissions cycle. Now it's really around 800 because so many places have been given away to those deferred applicants before they reach the market, so to speak. And on top of the deferred admits, Wharton also admits 90 healthcare management students annually. So maybe that spot you're fighting for in the overall pool is more like 710. Wait, it's even tighter. Wharton admits 75 MBA, MA, Lauder joint degree students. If you're not applying to Lauder, healthcare, Moelis, you're fighting for 650 spots. That's a really small class considering the demand for a Wharton education. Wharton has a reputation for attracting those with experience in finance. Is that fair? Well, in a recent class, 15% came from PEVC, 9% from banking, 5% from other financial services, 4% from investment management. Add that all up and it comes to 33% of a class at Wharton coming from financial services. Meanwhile, when Wharton presents its class profile, it actually shows consulting atop the hill at 28% of the class because it doesn't consolidate those financial statistics. What about tech? Well, about 10% of the class comes from tech. So the big three are about 70% of the class. But I don't think that is a Wharton story. Most programs hover around 2/3 of a class, give or take, from these areas. Said differently, Wharton's pre-MBA class composition is pretty typical for a competitive program. One interesting aspect of its class is its pre-MBA industries. 4% of its class comes from a healthcare background. So roughly 35 students have pure healthcare experience. But as we noted earlier, 90 students are in the healthcare management program. So clearly you don't need pure healthcare experience to get into that program. You just need to be able to validate your interest. And quick note, if you're interested in learning a lot more about Wharton or any of the other top MBA programs, including Chicago Booth, Kellogg, INSEAD, and LBS, check out OnTrack by mbaMission, our highly customizable MBA admissions platform and self-study course. I'm your guide in OnTrack, and I lead you through deep dives into 17 and growing of the world's top MBA programs in our Learning About modules. Recently, an applicant immersed himself in our Why Columbia module and told us he felt better prepped for a meeting with the admissions office than he did by meticulously reviewing the CBS website. And there's so much more. We have modules on long-term planning, every execution component, essay writing, resume crafting, and more. It's, as Poets and Quants opined, the most comprehensive MBA admissions resource ever created. Check it out. Now, let's get back to those pesky stats, returning to the GMAT, GRE, and GPA stats. Okay, the bad news. Wharton doesn't help us dig into those stats because they don't publish a range of GMAT or GRE scores or a range of GPAs. They don't share how many students take the GRE or the GMAT either. So much of what we can share is based on our client experiences and past data that they've provided. Wharton's average GPA is a 3.7. We had hypothesized that the thickest part of this curve might be from about 3.3 to 3.9, but again, hypothesis. Similarly, Wharton's GMAT average is 732. We surmise that a 710, 750 range is a cushy middle of the class, and that translates to a new GMAT average of 685 and a range of about 655 to 715. Meantime, its GRE average is 162 verbal, 163 quant, and based on our experience, 160 to 166 on each side is likely that cushy middle range. Summing up, what have we learned? For most applicants, Wharton has a smaller number of available places than it might seem. Wharton remains a leader in gender representation, but it's a tick behind its peers in GMAT, GRE, and GPA averages. Remember though, that is a real tick. It is next to nothing. We just noted those stats, but if you have a 3.3 to 3.9 GPA and 655 to 715 GMAT or a 160 to 166 GRE, you're likely in a comfortable range. And you don't need to come from a finance background. 2/3 of the class does not. There you have it, your Wharton stats. There's so much more to it than stats though. These stats understandably might just blur for you because the deviations are so few. You'll stand out because of your qualitative data, your accomplishments, unique professional exposure, and more. For more on what it takes to get into Wharton, check out our next video.